Indigenous rights activists have been out in full force across the country this week, stopping trains, snarling traffic, and preventing some politicians and government officials from getting to work. Now, the protests are all in support of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, or some of them in British Columbia, who say they were not properly consulted about this multi-billion-dollar natural gas pipeline that crosses through their territory. The NDP government in BC supports the project. So do all of the elected chiefs along the pipeline routes, but not all of the hereditary chiefs. But as tensions escalate, questions are mounting about who should get the final approval and what is the way forward. Let's find out. Joining me now is the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Perry Bellegarde. National Chief, always good to see you. 9-hour meeting with the Mohawks, Minister Miller, who was just on the program. Yeah. Not a lot of progress. Do you support the use of blockades to engender meetings?
I would say, first of all, I want to lift up Minister Mark. You know, the Crown has an obligation to get out there to meet with the nations and tribes. And so it's modest progress going forward. He's got to come back to the Prime Minister and Cabinet and make, you know, the full report back. So it's starting to move in the right direction because we want to see respectful, peaceful dialogue to get the resolvement to this issue here going forward. So I want to lift up the Crown because they have the obligation to do that. So Minister Mark Miller's gone out to the Haudenosaunee. Minister Carolyn Bennett's gone out to meet with the chiefs in northern BC. You have to keep those processes going.
Sorry, when Premier Jason Kenney says enforce the law, get the trains moving. When Andrew Scheer says check your privilege, protesters, call in the RCMP, what's your response to them?
I would say the proper exercise of police discretion should not be viewed as lack of enforcement. And so you have to lift up and respect the OPP, you know, for using proper discretion. It's not up to politicians to get this done. They have, operational-wise, they have to use proper discretion. And you're going to resolve this through peaceful dialogue. That's what's got to happen, no question. So you have to be careful on what the inflammatory statements are being made. And as far as privilege, let's clarify. We have to clarify this statement. Is it the privilege of 1,200 missing murdered Indigenous women and girls that Mr. Scheer is referring to? Or is it the 40,000 children in foster care? Or is it the homelessness and poverty facing First Nations people? Or the caps on education and healthcare? Like the privilege piece. Like
you were insulted by that comment?
Well, basically, you can't make statements that pit groups of people against groups of people. I think this is really a time when leaders should be looking at ways to bring people together, processes that unite people rather than divide people.
National Chief,
so you can't make statements like that. So I would say it's coming together because we're all in this together as Canadian people, you know, as First Nations people and non-Indigenous people. So we've got to work together.
I get all that, but you know the pressure is enormous on the government because when Via Rail closes down its entire passenger network, when CN closes its eastern network, the economic pressure is massive and it is growing. You say it's time for dialogue. The clock is ticking. How long till dialogue? How long is their patience? What if this lasts another week or a month? What happens?
You know, Evan, like, we totally get the inconvenience. You know, people are trying to go to school, trying to go to work, trying to get home. We totally get that. And then yet on the other side, these are long-standing issues, you know, dealing with I won't even call them land claims, land restoration, you know, restoration of land back to the original owners and inhabitants. These have been going on for hundreds of years. And there has to be calm, there's got to be dialogue because they haven't been dealt with.
But you and I have talked about this. I get, yeah. but those issues are not going to be resolved in enough time to get, you know, the blockade. So my question here is, what is the way forward to begin a resolution on those issues without blockades and holding up the economy? That's the big question right now.
It's all dialogue, so all sides got to come together for dialogue. That's what's got to happen. You know, and the thing I always say to people, like, we can't give up on being human beings. We can't give up on kindness and respect and working together to build this country. We can't give up on reconciliation. We can't give up on treaties and peaceful coexistence and mutually benefiting from sharing the land and resource wealth. We can't give up on that.
What do you say to politicians who are asking, what about the rule of law when there's a court order or a court injunction, when the economy is being held up?
Evan, I've always said it this way. When people use that term rule of law and you start peeling it back, then you start finding out, oh, there's elements of colonialism here. And then we say, whose law? Like right now, it's sad, but in 2020, the RCMP and the OPP and other police forces, they're sworn to uphold only two forms of law, common law, and then in the province of Quebec, civil law. And we're saying there's other laws in place that have been in place far long before those ones, which is Creators Law, Natural Law, First Nations Law. So no, I've got to make this point, because that's until you deal with another government and jurisdiction and other forms of law and governance structures in Canada, you're going to keep having conflict. So there has to be processes. And we've won tons of Supreme Court decisions, but the legislative and the executive branch of governments have not kept up with proper policies to respect title rights and jurisdiction. That's what's got to change.
Legitimate, but is the best way to do that to blockade and shut down rail lines? And I guess the question is, for a lot of people are going to know, is this a dry run, sir, for what's going to happen, National Chief, on Trans Mountain? In other words, people can't build anything.
What I say is this, is that, you know, like even when you use the word blockade and protests, inflammatory words, I use political activism, you know, and you want to bring about change. It's political activists, and people should not be criminalized for defending their rights and title and jurisdiction. And their biggest obligation is to protect land and waters. That's First Nations obligations.
But there's lots of protest. The right to protest exists. No one doubts it. But do you support the right to block? Just that you and
political activism should not be criminalized. You know, gathering should not be criminalized. And so I'm going to keep coming back to that space, and I'm going to always keep saying...
So are you going to legitimize blocking trains that may have this kind of deleterious effect in the economy?
What I'm saying is that you should not be criminalizing people for standing up for their rights, title, and jurisdiction. And I'm going to come back to this point about we're human beings. Let's not give up on each other. Kindness, respect, dialogue, moving forward is the best way to resolve this. We can't give up on reconciliation, and we can't give up on building a better country together where all people can benefit from the land and resources. Well, we have to do that.
We'll see where this goes. We're in a very critical moment, and your voice very important, National Chief. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.